She married a man who didn't love her to save the only thing her mother had left. He married a woman he didn't love to keep an inheritance his father was threatening to take away. Neither one of them expected the paperwork to turn into a marriage, and the marriage to turn into a war neither one of them could walk away from. This is the story of Denise Monroe and Marcus Ashworth. A woman who lost everything in one night of rain. A man who lost himself years before that rain ever fell. And a contract that was supposed to protect them both, until it became the very thing that could destroy them. Stay until the end, because the way this one closes is worth every minute. If you love a good redemption story, hit subscribe and turn on the bell right now, because you do not want to miss what happens next. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. Now, let's get into it. Before the rain, before the debt, before any of it, there was just a truck on the corner of Simpson and 5th, painted the same yellow it had been the day Denise's older sister, Camille, signed the loan papers for it. Monroe's Kitchen had never made anybody rich, but it had kept the lights on, kept Ruth's medication paid for, and kept a promise Denise made at Camille's graveside 2 years earlier that she would not let the one thing her sister built go under. Denise ran that truck the way her mother had raised her to run everything. Early, honest, and without complaint. Regulars knew her order before she said it. Regulars knew her laugh before they knew her name. She was, by every measure that mattered on that block, already a success, even if her bank account never once agreed. What nobody on that corner knew was how close things actually were. Camille's loan still had 2 years left on it. Ruth's blood pressure medication had gone up twice that year. Denise had started skipping her own dinners some nights, so the numbers would still add up by Friday, and she never once let her mother see it happen. She told herself it was temporary, the way people tell themselves that when temporary has already lasted longer than it should have. She had no way of knowing that the worst night of her life was already on its way toward her, moving through the city in the shape of a black sedan and a man who wasn't paying attention. The rain came down over Atlanta like it had somewhere else to be. Denise stood under the awning of Monroe's Kitchen watching the last customers of the night duck into their cars, counting the register, thanking God out loud for whatever they'd made that day, because complaining had never once paid a bill in her life. Business had been slow for weeks, and slower since Ruth's blood pressure had put her in the hospital twice that spring. Denise didn't know it yet, but this ordinary, rain-soaked closing shift was the last quiet night she would have for a very long time. She never saw the black sedan until it was already sliding sideways through the flooded intersection. It struck the truck's side panel and sent it spinning into the light pole, glass and grease, and her sister's memories scattering across wet asphalt. Denise was thrown clear, bruised, but breathing. Ruth, who had come to help close up, was not so lucky, and was rushed to the hospital with a head wound that would keep her under observation for 3 days. The man behind the wheel stepped out in a $2,000 suit, already on the phone with his lawyer before he asked if anyone was hurt. And something in the way he said the word damages before he said the word sorry told Denise everything she needed to know about what came next. His name was Marcus Ashworth, and the sedan belonged to Ashworth Development, the real estate empire his father Franklin had spent 40 years building. The insurance adjuster's number came back high, but Marcus's lawyer's number came back higher. Total damages, medical bills, and lost income came to $150,000, and Ashworth Development wanted it within 30 days, or they'd pursue Denise for negligence, claiming she'd left equipment in the road. It was a lie. And everyone standing in that hospital hallway knew it was a lie. But poor people do not get to call rich men liars in front of rich men's lawyers, not without a lawyer of their own, and lawyers were not something Monroe women had ever been able to afford. Denise had exactly $4,000 in savings and a mother recovering in a hospital bed. She told the lawyer, calmly, that she would find a way to pay every dollar because Monroe women did not run from what they owed, even when they hadn't been the ones to cause it. What she did not know was that Marcus himself had been the one driving, and that Marcus himself had been the one who insisted his lawyer push the negligence claim, not out of cruelty, but because admitting fault meant admitting he'd been distracted, And there were things about that night he wasn't ready to explain to anyone, including his father. Franklin Ashworth had been sick for over a year, a heart condition he kept mostly hidden from the company's board. What he was not hiding, not anymore, was his patience. He sat his only son down in the study that had belonged to his own father and told him plainly that he would not release full control of Ashworth development, not one signature of it, until Marcus was a married man and had stayed married for no less than 1 year. Franklin had watched his son move through women like weather systems for a decade, and he was done pretending it didn't break something in him every time he watched it happen again. Marcus argued. Franklin did not raise his voice, which was worse than if he had. He simply reminded his son that the company, the name, the legacy his own late wife had helped build before she passed, would go to a board of strangers if Marcus could not do one basic, human thing: choose somebody and stay. Marcus left that study angrier than he'd been in years, but underneath the anger was something he refused to look at directly, a tiredness that had nothing to do with the company at all. He drove straight to the woman he now owed $150,000 and made her an offer he told himself, all the way there, was purely business. Denise laughed in his face the first time he said it out loud. Marry him for 1 year, in name only, and every dollar of the debt would disappear. The truck rebuilt, her mother's medical bills gone. She told him there was something deeply wrong with a man who thought poverty made a woman's life available for purchase. Marcus told her, evenly, that it was a contract, not a kidnapping, that she would keep her name, her privacy, and her exit at the end of 12 months with more money in her pocket than she'd ever seen in her life. He said it like a man reading terms off a page, because that was the only way he knew how to say it without admitting he was asking her for something he had no right to ask. She closed the door on him twice before she ever picked up the phone to call back. Pride is a heavy thing to carry alone, and Denise had been carrying hers since the day she buried her sister. But debt does not care how proud a woman is, and neither does a hospital billing department. And by the 3rd day of turning the offer over in her mind, she was no longer asking herself whether she could live with the arrangement. She was asking herself whether she could live with what happened to her mother if she didn't. It was Ruth, still recovering, sitting up in a hospital bed with tubes still taped to the back of her hand, who said the thing her daughter needed to hear and didn't want to. She told Denise that she had raised her to be a woman who worked for what she had, not a woman who let hardship shame her into thinking she had no worth left to negotiate with. Pride does not pay a light bill, Ruth said, and it certainly does not pay a hospital bill, and there was no dishonor in a woman making a hard choice to protect the people she loved, only in pretending the choice didn't cost her something to make. Denise sat with that for 2 full days before she called the number on the lawyer's card. She had one condition of her own, and she said it slowly so there could be no confusion about it later. Her mother would not be treated as staff in that house. Ruth Monroe would be a guest, always, in whatever home her daughter walked into, contract or no contract, and if that condition could not be met, there would be no marriage at all, no matter how much money sat on the other side of the signature. Marcus agreed before Denise had even finished the sentence, which surprised them both, and it was the first small sign of the man underneath the suit. The Ashworth estate sat on 11 acres outside the city, the kind of house Denise had only ever seen in magazines at the hair salon. Marcus laid out the rules before she'd even unpacked a single bag. Separate wings. They performed affection only when Franklin was present. No questions about each other's past, no expectations beyond what the paperwork required. Denise listened to every word and told him she understood the arrangement perfectly, and that he should understand something too. She had buried a sister and nearly lost a mother in the same year, and she was not the kind of woman who needed his rules to remind her where the exits were. What neither of them accounted for was Franklin. He took to Denise the way a man takes to rain after a long dry season, asking about her mother, her sister's memory, the truck she'd rebuilt from nothing with her own 2 hands. He gave her a car, gave Ruth a small house behind the main estate she called her own, and told his son more than once that the woman he'd brought home had more backbone than every woman Marcus had ever paraded through that house combined. Marcus watched his father fall in love with a stranger, watched Ruth start to laugh again for the first time since Camille's funeral, and felt something shift in his own chest that he had no name for yet, and no intention of naming out loud. It started small. Marcus noticed when she skipped breakfast and asked why before he could stop himself. Denise noticed he'd memorized how she took her coffee without ever being told. Neither one commented on it out loud, because commenting on it would have meant admitting the contract had stopped being the only thing standing between them. Franklin's cousin Reggie, the one family member who saw everything and said little, told Marcus plainly one evening on the porch that he was watching a man fall for his own wife and pretend it was an accident, and that pretending had an expiration date whether Marcus was ready for it or not. Then came the conference in Savannah, the hotel's booking error, 1 room instead of 2. Denise took the bed. Marcus took the couch without complaint, which told her more about him than any speech could have. When Ruth collapsed from exhaustion weeks later, and Marcus sat in that hospital hallway all night without being asked, holding a cup of coffee he never drank just so he'd have something to do with his hands, Denise finally said the thing she'd been avoiding. That she was tired, not of the arrangement, but of pretending the arrangement was still the only reason she stayed. Marcus did not answer her that night. He would spend the next several weeks regretting the silence more than almost anything else he'd done in his life. Simone Reyes had been Marcus's on and off situation before Denise ever set foot in that house, and she did not take being replaced by a food truck girl quietly. She started asking questions, hiring people to dig into Denise's background, into the accident, into exactly why a poor woman from the East Side had moved into the Ashworth estate within a month of a car crash. Around the same time, Denise's old boyfriend, Terrence, resurfaced after 4 years of silence, flush with new money and a story about working overseas, offering to pay off whatever debt remained if she'd walk away from the arrangement entirely. No questions asked, no strings attached, or so he claimed. Denise turned him down, not out of loyalty to a contract, but because something in her had already changed, and she wasn't ready to say why. Not even to herself. Simone, meanwhile, found what she was looking for. The real accident report. The one that had been buried, proving Marcus had been on his phone the night he hit that truck, and that the negligence claim against Denise had been a complete fabrication from the start. She sat on that report for a week, deciding exactly how to use it, because Simone Reyes had never once in her life used a weapon before she'd sharpened it first. Before Simone ever took the report to Franklin, she came for Denise first, catching her alone outside the truck on a slow Tuesday afternoon. She smiled the whole time she said it. She told Denise that she knew about the contract, knew about the money, knew Denise had married Marcus to save a food truck and a mother's hospital bills, and that a woman like Denise should know her place before she let herself believe any of it was real. She said it the way people say cruel things when they want it to sound like concern, and for a moment, Denise felt every old fear about not belonging in that house rise up in her chest all at once. Then she remembered who raised her. Denise told Simone, calmly, wiping her hands on her apron the whole time, that she had buried a sister and nearly lost her mother, and neither of those things had come with an instruction manual on how to survive them either. So she certainly wasn't going to take advice from a woman who needed to humiliate a stranger at a food truck to feel secure in her own relationship. She said she didn't need Simone's permission to belong anywhere, least of all in a marriage Simone knew nothing true about. Simone left angrier than she arrived, and 2 days later, the report was on Franklin's desk. Franklin listened to Simone's accusations without a single change in his expression, then told her plainly that most marriages carry a few buried truths, and hers wasn't the confession she thought it was. But it stayed with him. That night, he asked his son directly whether the accident had been Marcus's fault, and Marcus, for the first time since the rain came down on that intersection, told the truth in full. He'd been on his phone. He'd been the one distracted. He'd let his lawyer threaten an innocent woman to protect his own pride, and then built a contract on top of that lie because it was easier than admitting he'd been wrong in front of the one man whose respect he'd spent his whole life chasing. Franklin's disappointment cut deeper than his anger ever could have. He told his son that what he felt for Denise was the only real thing to come out of the entire arrangement, and that wasting it over a lie he was too proud to correct would be the worst decision of his life, worse even than the accident itself. Marcus went to Denise that same night and told her everything. The phone, the false claim, the fabricated debt she and her mother had carried for months that was never rightfully theirs to carry in the first place. Denise listened in complete silence, packed a bag before morning, and left with her mother before the sun came up. Ruth didn't say, "I told you so," not once, though she'd earned the right to. She simply held her daughter while Denise cried out 4 months of carried weight in a single night. In the small rental they moved back into on the east side, the one with the window unit that rattled and the neighbors who still remembered them from before any of this started, Marcus did not chase them. Reggie made sure of that, telling his cousin plainly that a woman who just found out her whole hardship had been built on someone else's lie needed room to be angry before she could hear an apology, and that showing up too soon would only prove he still didn't understand what he'd done to her. So Marcus waited, and while he waited, he worked. He rebuilt Monroe's kitchen from the frame up and had it delivered anonymously to the lot behind Ruth's old house. No note, no name attached, just a truck that looked exactly like the one Camille had built, down to the same shade of yellow. He paid off every remaining bill in Denise's name without a single string, then told his father the truth publicly, in front of the board, taking full responsibility for the accident on record, knowing it could cost him the very control of the company he'd built the whole contract to protect. Franklin watched his son become, for the first time, a man who owned his mistakes instead of managing them, and told him quietly that now, finally, he had something worth building a real inheritance around. He didn't come with lawyers or contracts the second time. He came with roasted corn and sweet tea, standing outside the truck window like any other customer, and told Denise plainly that everything he should have said honestly from the beginning, he was finally ready to say, that the accident was his fault, that the contract was a coward's way of getting close to her without risking anything real, that somewhere between her mother's kitchen table and that hospital hallway, what started as an arrangement had turned into the truest thing in his life, and he was asking, with nothing to offer but the truth this time, if she'd let him try again for real. No clauses. No clock running out on a year. Denise didn't answer right away. She finished serving the customer behind him first, because Monroe women do not let good food get cold over a man's timing, and some habits are worth keeping no matter how much a man's heart is racing on the other side of the window. Then she told him that trust rebuilt slower than trucks did, but that she was willing to let him try, one honest day at a time, starting with this one. Ruth, watching from the porch with her arms crossed, only shook her head and said the thing she'd say once more before that year was out. Pride don't pay the light bill, but the truth always does eventually. A year to the day after the rain came down over that intersection, Denise Monroe married Marcus Ashworth again, this time in front of a church full of people who knew every true thing about how they'd started. No secrets left standing between them and the folks who loved them. Franklin walked Ruth down the aisle himself, calling her family long before either of their children made it official, and the whole congregation stood when the two of them passed, because everybody in that room knew exactly what it had cost both families to get to that Sunday. Monroe's kitchen sits behind the Ashworth estate today, still painted that same yellow, feeding half the neighborhood after church every week, run by a woman who never once let hardship take her dignity, no matter how hard the world tried to take it from her. Franklin lived long enough to hold his first grandchild, a girl they named after Camille, and long enough to tell Marcus one more time that the best decision he ever made wasn't the company, wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't a single deal. He closed in 40 years of building Ashworth Development. It was recognizing real love when it walked up to his door in an apron, smelling like roasted corn and rain, asking for nothing but a fair chance. Some contracts are written to bind two people together on paper for exactly as long as the paper says. This one, in the end, was rewritten by two people choosing each other honestly every single day after, for nothing but love.